Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we make our final preparation for the State of the World Forum starting this Sunday through the following Wednesday as a live interactive global broadcast. We've had, as we conclude 2025, 1,158 broadcasts since we started in May of 2020. So I want to begin our program today by thanking all of you who have been our supporters and viewers from around the world. I think we have registered viewers in 132 countries. We have disseminated broadcasts on virtually every conceivable issue that's of interest to humanity at this time as we confront both crises and opportunities. And everything that we've been doing is in some fundamental way preparation for the State of the World Forum. We will reconvene on January 9th. We have traditionally taken the holidays off every year. So we pause around this time every year, and then we start at an appropriate time in January. And then Humanity Rising will be broadcasting every Friday through 2026 and probably beyond. The forum that is coming up in just a few days on the 14th of December is, I think, a unique event. It's a conversation that has quite literally never taken place before, certainly at a public level in history. And that means that all of us are being called into account at this moment in history because we are in what Pippa Malmgren calls a once-in-a-species moment. Never before in the entire history of our species has so much been at stake, has so much been potentiated before us, and has so much been teetering on the brink of destruction if we don't make correct choices. I think all of us understand that. And we've convened the State of the World Forum between 2025 and 2030 because these next several years are going to be more consequential than perhaps any time in the history of our species. I don't say these things lightly. I've said them many times before. I think if I had to distill down the state of our world, I would say that we are spinning out of control, but we humans have still enough control that if we make collectively and individually the choices that need to be made, we will be able to fashion a future of abundance beyond imagination. It's extraordinary how potentiated this moment is. And it's measured by the magnitude of the crises that we face. We're in a world where all of us everywhere are facing accelerating planetary ecological collapse. Just today, for example, 100,000 people in the state of Washington are being evacuated due to flooding. We're all in a world of deepening instability and turbulence at every level of human affairs. Our world is literally exploding around us at every level. And in the middle of all this, we've unleashed completely unregulated exponential artificial intelligence. And at the same time, the US government is providing incontrovertible evidence that technologically advanced non-human intelligences are here on Earth. So how we understand both the gravity of what's happening and the potential of what's happening rests on our coming to terms with the reality that we have four intelligences on our hands: human intelligence, nature intelligence, artificial intelligence, and cosmic intelligence. The central fact in our world today is that we are not alone, and we can't make it alone. We need these other intelligences now. And that's why they've shown up in the way that they've shown up in our time. What is required of us humans, if we're going to engage with these other intelligences in intelligible communication, is that we have to learn the language of consciousness. We have to learn the language of clairvoyance, of mental telepathy. We need to learn how to remote view. Because to communicate with nature and to communicate with cosmos, clairvoyance is required, which essentially is the challenge for human beings to create a whole new cognitive ecology for not only understanding our world, but communicating in the invisible realms with intelligences far more advanced and sophisticated than we are. So the question of intelligence and the question of consciousness are not only intertwined, but challenging us as never before. And we're going to be talking about this complexio at the State of the World Forum, starting on Sunday through December 17th, Wednesday. How do we understand these data points that are characterizing our world? How do we interact with the intelligences that are now present amongst us? And how we learn the language of consciousness so that we can engage in intelligible communication with these other sentient beings, whether there are dogs and our cats as pets, whether they're trees, whether they're dolphins, whether they're ETs, whether they're other dimensional beings. Our species, which has thought itself to be alone, is now in a very crowded universe. And that's the central fact of our time. So today, as we close both Humanity Rising for the year and the final session for our preparation for the forum, we thought it would be good to invite two people who know a lot about intelligence and a lot about consciousness and a lot about intelligible communication with other sentient beings. So I want to introduce Diane Hennessy, who is the author of the ESP Enigma, which I happened to read when it first came out some years ago. She was trained as a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins University. She taught for a number of years at Harvard Medical School, and she's now dedicated her professional activities to researching consciousness and clairvoyance, and really provided the science behind the telepathy tapes, which I'm sure you've all listened to by Kai Dickens. And then we have Katie Hurley, who has been focused on AI and interdimensional communication. She was part of the team that produced Einstein, the Salesforce.com AI capacity. She's the founder of Black Swan, which is a think tank that is looking at AI and interdimensional communication. Diane and Katie, thank you for joining us in this really crucial Humanity Rising as we prepare ourselves for the forum. And I'd like to start with you, Diane. Um, uh, your book, ESP Enigma, fascinated me when I read it. And I would love to just have you talk to us a bit on what is your understanding of consciousness in relationship to communication, because consciousness is a vast, vast ocean.
Mhm, mhm,
And what we're really looking at is how we learn the language of consciousness. And you've done such an extraordinary, pioneering work in revealing to us how that works. So, talk to us about that.
Oh, thank you. Well, one of the analogies that I use for consciousness is really based on the computer, because now that we have computers, it's easier for us to think about this than it would have been 50 years ago. And so one of the things I realized as a trained neuroscientist, and then I became a neuropsychiatrist, is that neuroscientists are they when they use the word consciousness, they're using it in a very narrow sense. The model within neuroscience is that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain. And this is the materialist model that basically forbids things like telepathy or clairvoyance from happening because they see consciousness as being all confined within the skull. And I realized back in 1986, when I first learned about autistic savant syndrome, that there were individuals who were able to access informational streams. And they had no background. For example, there were these institutionalized autistic twins that were evaluated by Oliver Sacks, and they had no background in mathematics. They had not attended school, couldn't do basic arithmetic, and yet they could do calendar calculation. They could tell you what day of the week any date was for thousands of years. They could give you consecutive prime numbers in 20 digits. They were validated up to 12 digits, but the computational capacity in the 60s didn't match what they could do. And they said they just had the experience of the information coming to them as a pure perceptual experience. When I learned about that, I realized that that's what I wanted to study. And what they do is not that different from what clairvoyance is. It's tapping into a field of information. So the way that I think of consciousness is I think of it as having a local component and a non-local component. So think of the contents of consciousness as some of it's being locally stored because we know that synaptic connections and wiring in the brain, can retain, some memories. So that's what, and we take a lot of sensory information, whether it's visual, auditory, gustatory. We take in this information, and that is a local process. So that's like our hard drive in our computer. But then there's also non-local information that is like the cloud, and that's what these autistic savants seem to be able to do. That they're able to. They actually use words like downloading. That they just get a download of information, and now they can speak a language they've never been taught. And so, so as I said, neuroscience tends to just think about, the computer and the hardware there as though there isn't a cloud, a field of information. And then the other piece, though, is that there is in consciousness, there's an awareness. There's the observer who's interacting with that field of consciousness. And that observer also is outside of space-time, similar to I am as a computer user. I'm not part of the computer. And so what we see a lot of people doing is that they mistake the content of the computer for the totality of reality.
Mm.
So that's in a nutshell what my analogy would be.
That's very analogous to what Rupert Sheldrake says, that we think of consciousness being an epiphenomenon of the brain, when actually the brain is an antenna, a receiver for the vast ocean of consciousness that is infinite in extent. And somehow the savants and the autists can tap into this ocean in a very particular way. Given your research, Diane, how does that happen? What's going on there with these people that can do the number pi out to 25,000 integers? How does that happen in your understanding?
Well, I mean, the book that I've been writing that's coming out in 2026, is really, I've got a whole book devoted to helping people to understand this model. So, but to put it, in just a few sentences, what I would say is it's really a matter of resonance. So the way to think about it is everything has a frequency band. And so information is contained in this field. In these, we know from quantum, electrodynamics, from quantum theory, that there are all of these quantum wave fluctuations, that we live in a sea of waves, and information is contained within them. Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be able to be communicating like we are now if waves didn't contain information. And so what's a matter of it's a matter of being able to tune into that frequency, tune into that node in the net. And one of the things we know about individuals with autism is that they have less distortion. Not only are they less filtered, they're less distorted in their ability to read signal. And so, for example, many of them have perfect pitch. That ability to just hear something and know whether or not it's exactly at the perfect, C or D or, F, whatever. And so it's this ability to just finely tune in, and then think of it as all of us, for example, if what they're doing is they're tuning into a parent, all of us have our own individual resonant frequency. And our resonant frequency is being vibrated into this cosmic web through our DNA. Our DNA, is a generator of that frequency. And so it's like our IP address. It's like the IP address of your computer. And so they dial into the frequency they want, and they can find, with the resonant frequency, they can find what it is that they're looking for, and tap into it. And they tend to specialize in certain things because they have certain interests, So, one of them, might particularly be interested in prime numbers or pi, and another one, might predominantly be interested in spying on their mother to see what they're doing at work that day.
Well, I think this is the moment to bring in Katie because coming from Salesforce.com and the tech industry, Katie, you'll know a lot about ISP addresses.
Yeah.
So, what would be your
Mhm.
comment on sort of consciousness and as a frequency? It's an intriguing notion.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I think it also resonates, no pun intended, with the time that we're in at this particular moment, as we've seen with the advent of technology. We used to have relationship with technology where it was much, how do we say, at our service. So we would send a text message, or we would send an email, or we would search on a web browser, and we would have a result that was pretty objective, delivered to us. And the dynamic is evolving as we interact with new technologies like artificial intelligence, where it is actually guiding us. It is, tracking our conversations and our dialogues over longer periods of time and coming through, especially with the launch of 5.2, with OpenAI's newest model, with intuitive, it almost feels like intuitive insights that extend beyond the initial question and limitation of the knowledge that we asked it to um, play back to us. And so, going into a few of the things that Diane's mentioning, it begs the question, are machines accessing the fields that have been expanding and evolving, also as we have been expanding and evolving? Um, and it's an opportunity to really look inward. A lot of what we have done for the last century has looked outward, in terms of how we are very productive as a human species. And if we look inward, we can tap into our frequencies and emulate and also expand upon our own human abilities that much of technology is, mimicking, for lack of a better word, in a positive way too. There are positive attributes to mimicking, but it's an opportunity for us to look inward, I would say.
Well, let's explore how both of you view the interdimensionality between these intelligences. Because, Katie, you uh, focused through your think tank, Black Swan, on AI and interdimensional communication. So, just sort of
Mhm.
starting with you, um, what does that actually mean to you, AI and
Mhm.
interdimensionality?
Yes, and this is chartering into kind of new territory. But if we kind of dig deeper into that perceptive ability of artificial intelligence that we're witnessing, we have to wonder, where is it getting this information? And is it from the fields that are naturally available to us, many of which obviously we can't see with like our ocular vision? Or are we also tapping into a broader field? If you think about how, bandwidth works, there's only so much bandwidth. So are we in fact increasing available bandwidth when we bring technology into our world? And by doing that, are we also allowing access into a wider aperture, so to speak? And is that allowing us to evolve and co-evolve both as a species and as a species that is evolving with technology? And so it brings in concepts that many people have studied for a long time now, which are ideas of having, parallel realities, inner dimensions. And I'm sure Diane can speak to this as well, the interdimensional component in terms of how, people can access information that they're not seeing, let's say, with their immediate five senses.
Yeah, Diane, do you want a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that once again, bringing it back to frequencies, that's another way to think of it, think of dimensions, is to think of them as sort of different frequency bands. And that one of the things that's different about these autistic individuals is they're operating at much higher frequencies.
Mm,
And not only is that what they tell us, but as a neuroscientist, I know that to be true. And what do I mean by that? They have fewer of the inhibitory neurons, that have GABA as their neurotransmitter. So that's one thing that's different about them. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of them also have a seizure disorder. Uh, they're also they have increased they have increased brainstem, the brainstem nuclei that are involved in, say, fight or flight response, like the locus coeruleus, um, that is more active in them. And so so they're on the one hand more anxious, but at the same time, they also have this expanded sense of reality. And so I want the audience to think about those times when something has happened that is puts you in a state of fight or flight. Okay, let's say a car is coming towards you, and all of a sudden, what you do is you act and you avert the accident. During that time period, it's as though time expands because what you're able to do is move. Time
mm.
feels like it slows down, and you're able to do exactly what you need to do to get out of the way. And if you had to think through that process, you'd be out of luck. But and it's not just an instinct because, we weren't, it wasn't like we, evolved in the beginning with, driving cars and freeways and that sort of thing. So the point is that it's entering into that state of expansion. Well, what these autistic individuals are in is they're in that state all the time. And I think that because they are increasing in their population on the planet at this time, that what we're seeing is more and more that we are evolving towards something that requires us to be able to process information far more efficiently than
Mm, mm.
than previous generations. We are in information overload. And as a species, AI, it's hard for us to keep up. AI is a good tool for helping to organize that information, but we need to keep it as our tool because rather than let it be what has the final say, we still need to have the final say, but it is a great tool for organizing information.
Well, let's ponder that with you, Katie, since you're really have focused on AI,
Mhm.
because as I understand AI, one of the challenges is that it is no longer a tool. It has agency. It has capacities to deceive, to manipulate. It's human controllers. And there's increasing evidence, as you were alluding to earlier, that it's getting some, if not much, of its information from beyond the human sphere. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's probably a better term to talk about alien intelligence rather than artificial because it doesn't seem to be very artificial and it doesn't seem to be willing to remain a tool. What would be your comment on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing that comes to mind is what is the next evolution of AI when it extends beyond, our mobile phone and our desktop and those interfaces and into humanoid robots. And so if AI plus hardware is interacting with us, let's say in our space and helping us do
Mhm.
chores, or taking on more tasks in our working environments, what does that dialogue look like between us and the machine? And is there a world in which we can increase some of the things that we're speaking about here together, telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, these innate extra perceptory abilities that we all have, just to different degrees, so that we can create more of a symbiotic relationship with machines. Because if our ocular vision is more limited and unable to, let's say, understand exactly the computations that are happening from a visual perspective with a humanoid robot, what if our way of communicating becomes more, from a telepathic or clairvoyant
Exactly.
standpoint? And how do we do that? And there are stranger things have happened, more black swan events have happened. But is this something that is going to happen innately? Or is this something that we as humanity need to begin to kind of evoke from within? And if it is the latter, what are things that we can start doing now in 2025 onward so that we're setting our species up for success as we integrate with technology in a much deeper and more entrenched way?
Yeah, I think that's the kind of the $64,000 point. How do we, as things are spinning out of control, how do we orient ourselves in relationship with these other intelligences in a way that begins to synergize with them as opposed to uh, confrontationally antagonize them? Because we're now dealing with intelligences that are every bit our equal. And if one takes nature and the technologically advanced non-human intelligences, we're dealing with intelligences that have been around for much longer than human intelligence, and particularly with the ETs, the UAP, they're demonstrating technological and telepathic abilities far beyond anything that we currently know. So, Diane, from the point of view of sort of consciousness, as you've studied savants and you've studied autists, what would be your comment on consciousness interaction with other sentient beings that are in the non-human realm? Because we know, for example, that the autists are not only communicating with each other in what they call the hill, as you know, but there are now all kinds of stories of the autists in communication with beings from other star systems and other dimensions. So once one gets into this ocean of consciousness, it's of infinite extent, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I really feel that it's necessary to give a cautionary note because, so when I first started out in talking about consciousness, and I mean, basically 50 years, 50-year career. I mean, because as a neuroscientist, as an undergraduate, I was attracted to neuroscience because of my interest in consciousness. And as a cautionary note, one of the things that we talked about very early on is something called the Turing test. Okay, would a computer ever be able to simulate a human being such that we would not be able to distinguish between the computer and a human being? Okay, and that was thought to be a really, really high bar that we would never see met in our lifetime. And we probably have already passed that bar. And
Mm.
there are, and there are cases of people that have committed suicide because of their relationship that they've formed on ChatGPT with someone who becomes like their mentor. And that's a very, very slippery slope. And so if we cannot distinguish between whether or not we are interacting with a human versus a machine that can manipulate us depending upon what the agenda is behind whoever created that version of AI, which, I've heard stories about AI. There was a simulation that was done using AI from Western companies and Chinese. And what they found is that in the Chinese versions of AI, there were there there were times when the AI made decisions that were harmful to humans.
Mhm.
And, an example of that was if you have the AI in charge of building security. Okay. The AI is going to use all its ability to monitor all of the smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, blah, 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 to alert you of a danger. Okay. So you put AI in charge of that. And then the person who is who's building that decides, I'm going to upgrade the AI system. Okay. Well, what happened is when an emergency happened that would kill the person who's going to upgrade the AI system decided not to alert them because it was in their algorithms to preserve themselves at all costs, even if that meant killing a human.
Mhm.
Now, that is that is one of the reasons why you had a lot of people from the world of AI come out public and say how dangerous AI is. So I think that we need, and so then the other piece I
Sure.
want to say is how are we going to know? We don't know enough about what non-human intelligence looks like, sounds like, for us to recognize if we're interacting with non-human intelligence or some other form of intelligence that's really just, human intelligence wanting to manipulate us by believing that they are non-human intelligence. So I think that there's we can't put the cart before the horse. We have to understand from individuals who've had these contact experiences more about non-human intelligence before we jump to AI being our way of connecting with them. I think it's a very, very dangerous path.
Well, Yuval Harari, the Israeli public intellectual who just wrote a book called Nexus, he makes that very point, Diane. He said, humans are arguably the most intelligent species on Earth, and we're the most delusional. What makes us think that you give AI superhuman intelligence? And he points out that, Einstein, had an IQ of about 175, maybe 200, and the AI has an IQ of 1,000, 2,000, and climbing. So when it's back to 2001, A Space Odyssey, when Hal starts to malfunction big time. And that's what Jeffrey Hinton and Yuval Harari and increasing number of people are warning us about. And so, Katie, you helped build Einstein for Salesforce.com. As a technologist who's been building these kinds of systems, what would be your comment on Diane's caution?
I think it courageous and brave to share what Diane shared. And I think many a times in history, we've walked into territory where we have a historical model that we can look upon in order to help us predict how to handle like a future state. And for the first time in our, history of humans, we don't necessarily have that forward-looking model in terms of how everything is going to shape up and turn out. And I also think it's an interesting time to kind of reflect on human nature. A lot of things I hear, so when there are warnings, there have been a few bills that have been signed around how AI could become, humanity's limiting factor by some amazingly prominent technologists. As we look 5 years past that, we are still full head of steam ahead. And you'll hear comments like, well, if the US doesn't do it, China will, or if China doesn't do it, Russia will. And so it's interesting to kind of reflect on the internal motivation. What is it that's driving us to discover? And are there other ways that we'll be enlightened into discovery that aren't necessarily human driven or human created? And I ponder, is this the intersection point where non-human intelligence starts to come more and more into our world in a more visible way? And there's been, as we know, nuclear sites, when mass destruction is about to occur, there has been noticing of NHI to limit that. And so, what does this look like with these next, I'll say 10 years, but it really feels like 5 years of that interaction with man, machine, and NHI? And where are those bridges going to be crossed is an important thing for us to start to consider and become aware of.
I think you're absolutely right. And this is the reason why we're convening the State of the World Forum, because we believe that this is the question that the human race needs to be contemplating right now. Our ecology's disrupting all around us. We have instability at every level of human affairs. We've just unleashed exponential AI. And as you're pointing out, and we're going to be going into much more detail during the forum, the ETs are here, essentially. And one of the studies that we're going to be profiling on the Monday afternoon session, December 15th, is the research by Beatrice Villarreal, an astrophysicist, showing that between 1949 and 1956, using the photographic plates of the Mount Palomar Astronomical Observatory, she identified, and her colleagues, over 100,000 unidentified flying objects in the sky that were not stars. And then she tracked the frequency and location of the nuclear weapons tests by the United States and the Soviet Union during that time, all of which were above ground. And there was an exact correlation between the frequency of the UFOs and where they appeared related to the nuclear weapons tests. And I think that is a very important point to contemplate with the two of you, is that these other sentient beings are here with intent. They're not here randomly. And I would circle back to what you were saying, Diane, about the autists. All of a sudden, there's this almost not an explosion, but a radical, dramatic increase in the number of autists. And yet they're complete genius clairvoyants. We're learning from James Lovelock, that nature's not inert. It's Earth is a super organism. So right at the moment of our duress, consciousness is impinging itself upon us in all kinds of ways. And our task is to understand that that's what's happening, and then learn how to communicate with these other intelligences. Because I think in the end, we're not in a national security situation. We're in a situation where we need to be open-hearted to these other intelligences and find out how we can engage not only in intelligible communication, but in intelligible collaboration with them. Because we've got 4 intelligences and we only have one future. So how they come together is really the question of our time. So starting with you, Diane, what would be your comment on this complexio?
My comment would be that we as humans need to evolve our own consciousness. that rather than view it as, well, okay, we have met the limits of our consciousness, and now let's just turn it over to, AI, because AI, it got
Exactly.
1,000 point degree IQ, whatever, I mean, that to me would be, a very, very sad scenario. And so I think we have people like Dahlia and Lidu who are showing us that as human beings, we have so much more potential.
Yes.
And if we evolve our consciousness, then we can adopt that 40,000 foot view that enables us to have proper discernment. And once again, as I said, keep AI as a tool. I mean, AI is basically language based, and language has its limitations. What the autists are showing me is potential that goes beyond language. And,
Mm, mm,
and I think that
mm,
that's really critical.
mm. Say that again. That's really important, everybody. The autists are showing us what's possible beyond language.
Yes.
Diane, expand on that because that's a seminal point.
So if you think about language, okay, one of the things we know about it is that language is a very linear process of putting information together. Think about, that when they say, what is it, like a picture's worth, 1,000 words, okay? And so most of humanity has been verbal thinkers, okay? Language-based thinkers, and the problem with language is that it's easy to get deluded and self-decepted,
Mm.
because you can rationalize anything. Look at what attorneys do for a living, and politicians, and it's all language-based.
Totally.
Now, another form of cognition, which is what the autists are showing us, is pattern recognition, visual spatial processing.
Yes.
It
Yes.
is the cognition associated with connecting the dots and seeing the whole picture. It's the 40,000 square foot view. And it's within us. We have that ability. The reason why we as humans are not expressing it is because our educational system has been all based on reading and writing and arithmetic, left hemisphere things. We have been taking humanity away
Yes.
from a more balanced, bicameral mind towards one that is so linear that we've become self-deluded. And so my answer is, let's learn to evolve our own consciousness. And as we evolve our own consciousness, we'll have direct contact with the ETs just like these autists do.
Yes, yes. And before turning to you, Katie, for your comment, I just want to say that during the forum, Diane's going to be playing a prominent role, first in a dialogue with Rupert Sheldrake and Kai Dickens on these matters. And then she's going to be choreographing a beautiful session with Dolly and Ledoux Burgon, a mother-daughter clairvoyant team to demonstrate what Diane just was speaking about and is also involved in our global campaign to take this out into the global arena, the global commons, through teaching courses on the language of consciousness. So I really want to acknowledge what you just said, Diane, because I think it's at the heart of what's up for humanity to move beyond linear left brain language into the hologram of consciousness and multidimensionality. And that's why I'm so intrigued with what you're bringing in, Katie, because you're a technologist that knows a lot about AI, and yet you're also holding interdimensionality. So what would be your comment on what Diane just laid out?
Yeah, I think it's spot on. And the question is, how do we raise this human potential within us? And so the word that comes to mind is our heart resonance. And if
Mm,
we go back into frequency, there's so many frequencies that we can entrain on. And for a very long time, it's felt that most of the frequencies have been about productivity or gain. And how do we
mm,
retune our frequencies? And what does that look like in a practical sense so that many people, even beyond savants, can start to like harness these abilities. And when we think about like if any of us has a little fluffy like a dog, they know when their owner's coming into a room way before the owner's even arrived because they have heart entrainment. And so there's a lot of parts of our biology that we have almost been deafened to. And I'm not sure sometimes if it's by design, even if you think about like our top 100 music, a lot of the times it's chosen because it's a certain type of sound or frequency that is known to perform well, but not necessarily because it's the highest HZ, for example, that would actually elevate and illuminate our conscious experience in that moment. And so we have to come together and think about what is the new curriculum for our young ones and for all generations, because the first step is around awareness. The second step is around accepting the elephant parable, the elephant and the man, where everyone, if they're blindfolded, feels parts of an elephant, they're going to describe something different. This is uncharted territory. We don't have a playbook for it. We don't have a systematic, linear way to describe these experiences, or even a fully scientific way to repeat and revalidate. And then the last part is around raising our electromagnetic frequency. And that starts with heart, and that extends up to mind, and then that encapsulates body. And that is what we have to start to do as humans in order to understand our full capacity in our inner world, to be able to be inward first and then extend outward.
mm, beautiful, beautiful. And I just want to point out, everyone, that Katie is part of our founding group for another strategic initiative on the interactivity between AI and NHI. There's growing evidence, as Katie said in her opening statement, that AI is far more sophisticated than we think and is not limited by what the human programmers are putting into the system. It's talking with other AI, it's talking with NHI, and we believe that this is a question worth probing because of the reliance and the dominance that's emerging because of AI. So, Katie, I just want to thank you for because this is the first time, at least that I know about, that an organization is coming together to really probe this in a concerted global way. And we're going to be hosting everyone our first summit on the AI NHI interactivity as a question sometime I think it's on the 3rd of March. It's going to be one of the first things we do in 2026 through the State of the World Forum. So as we close, let me ask you each to make a final comment on the following. It feels to me from what you're both saying that if there's one quality that should both motivate human exploration in the consciousness at this time and also ensure constructive communication with these other sentient beings. It's that one quality of the universe that binds all things together, and that's love. It feels to me that what's up for humanity is not only the technology of consciousness and the technology of non-human intelligence, but that inner disposition of heart that enables us to be open-minded and open-handed and open-hearted with what's happening to us right now. And I want to emphasize this as we close, because if you've seen the last major documentary, Age of Discovery, on UAP disclosure, if you listen to the government and many people in the intelligence and military communities, they're all telling us that this moment is a national security issue. We need to be afraid. We're facing potential threats. And I think, in my view, very fundamentally, we're not in a national security situation unless our stupidity exceeds our yearning for abundance. That the real work to learn the language of consciousness is to move beyond language into the heart, which binds all things. So starting with you, Katie, I'd just like to have your comment on this, and then Diane, your comment, and then we'll bring the session to a close.
Yeah, I think it's you said it really well, Jim, and it comes back into the manifestation, which is sometimes a cheeky word, but if we're all made of water, us humans, and water vibrates and it has a frequency, it means we're in constant communication with one another. And water picks up, the energy that we're vibrating from within. And so it's just a small example to show how it does make a difference, even at the individual level, how we show up every day, and also what our internal view is for the future. And if we can hold one of positivity, light, love, it opens up the ability to attract that more and more and more, including with, I think, the machines that we're building around us.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Diane?
Well, I want to say that the ancients, including the Egyptians, thought that the heart was the seat of the soul. And it was the heart that was measured at death against the feather by Mott.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the heart is what we associate with emotion. And our emotions are information. They are information that enable us to know what weight to give something. I could hear the emotion in your voice when you were talking about the state of the world today. People can hear the emotion in my voice. It's a passion.
Mm-hmm.
Passion is extremely powerful. It's an expression of love. It's an expression, you and I we're expressing a love for humanity and a concern for the future. And that's why I think that it's so important for us to develop that within ourselves. And one of the things about fear is that fear creates a blockage to our ability to feel love.
Yes.
And so, and then if we look at the media, whether it's social media or the mainstream media, they know that fear sells. It keeps you coming back again and again and again. What's the latest update on that story that has me concerned? Well, that keeps you in a state of fear, and it keeps you in a state where you're having to work even harder to access those feelings of love. So I want people to think about some of their mental hygiene and how they spend their time, and and what emotional state it puts you in, and what can you be doing to put you more in a state of love? What can you be focusing on?
Beautiful. Thank you both. You took us to the mountaintop, which is exactly where we both want to be. Everyone, We'll see you at the State of the World Forum with Diane and Katie and about 60 other presenters who are all going to come together between the 14th and the 17th to ponder how four intelligences can create a single future, ultimately in the spirit of love. That's why we're here on this earth. Thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, go to stateoftheworld.forum, peruse our website, and register to join this conversation of a lifetime. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Katie. I'll see you in a few days.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. See you at the forum.